From the halls of Austin to the fights in D.C. that hit us at home, this is Politics with the Big Dogs.
Hello, Texas, and welcome to Politics with the Big Dogs. I'm Anthony Holm, your host, and thank you for joining us. I'm a Republican trial lawyer. I used to run candidate campaigns, issue campaigns, work for the governor, work for Attorney General, been in and out of government. I'm an insider in Austin. We are speaking the truth here. We are identifying issues and substantive policy matters and advancing the conservative movement. Today we're going to talk about the Islamification of Texas. From 400-acre Muslim community being built in Plano to the Islamist recruiting videos begging Muslims to move to Dallas in their native language. You can live just like you're in your homeland. This is a show where facts still matter, folks. We're also going to talk about President Trump's change in the marijuana classification. What that means for Dan Patrick, as Trump and Patrick are in conflict. You'll remember there was a great fight during the legislative session and a bill that ultimately got vetoed. Dan Patrick leading the charge in one chamber. And Texas doesn't, as I understand it, doesn't allow medical marijuana. We don't, in fact, legalize marijuana, but we do have THC derivatives, some nominal amount, often called Delta 8. I'm less familiar with the science behind it, but we are one of the outlier states, as I understand it, that has the least amount. There is an allowance, as I understand it, for children and maybe adults with epileptic seizures, having 5, 10, 20 a day who can have nominal amounts of a medication with some THC. But nonetheless, this puts President Trump and the federal government in a contradiction with Dan Patrick. So what does that mean for next legislative session, Texas moving forward? And then we're also going to look at the continued failure of Republicans, particularly in Congress, to stand for principle. They did it so well for a few months. I was really proud of them. But the most recent event is the Obamacare subsidies. And you'll remember the government shut down over this. What happened was Biden and the Republicans joined together and right after COVID and said, man, Obamacare's failing. We've got to prop it up. And they jammed an outrageous amount of money into Obamacare. And they did it under the COVID guise. Well, the Democrats said, hey, we got to keep funding Obamacare at COVID levels. And the Republicans banded together, even though they only have a 3 or 4 seat majority in the U.S. House, and they were able to weather the storm of the Democrats. I was really proud of them. I thought, oh my gosh, finally Republicans stood for something on policy and stuck together. Well, now that has occurred and the shutdown has passed and the Republicans were not held hostage, they didn't surrender to the hostage taking. 4 moderates, 4 rhino Republicans from outside of Texas said, we're going to join with the Democrats in 2026 and we're going to force this Obamacare vote. That's just heartbreaking. Heartbreaking. Also shocking is at least one Texas Republican U.S. congressman said, yeah, I'll support that. So we're going to go a deep dive into it. What does it mean? What does Obamacare mean and how is that harming us? Because Obamacare is a failure at least as big as the fraud in Minnesota that we're seeing right now. At least as big. This is Anthony Holm, your host of Politics with the Big Dogs. This is not a cocktail party in Washington, D.C. This is a deep dive on substantive issues of policy and politics and concern and interest. And we're going into it.
More Politics with the Big Dogs coming up next.
Don't forget to sign up for our newsletter at politicswiththebigdogs.com. We'll keep you informed on new episodes, new guests, and new opportunities for your voice to be heard across Texas. Learn more and sign up today at politicswiththebigdogs.com.
If you read the newspaper or watch your local news, did you know you're only getting press release news from Austin? We're here to bring you the real stories. politicswiththebigdogs.com.
All right, folks. Obamacare is a money pit for taxpayers. It's at least as bad as the fraud occurring that we're exposing right now in Minnesota. At least as bad. It's just shocking. So what does it mean? Well, the Wall Street Journal editorial board nailed it when they said the Affordable Care Act has become a permanent subsidy machine, distorting insurance markets and driving long-term federal spending. Of course it has. 100%. We all knew Obamacare was a scam. We all knew that Obama, the Democrats, and the Republicans who joined lied to us. You can keep your doctor if you like your doctor. You're not going to pay more. This is a short-term fix. It has just ballooned, like all subsidy and entitlement programs in the federal government, and it's going to destroy huge aspects of our society. So what does it look like? What's the cost to taxpayer? What's the cost to you and I? $350 billion with a B. over 10 years. That's what, just to keep the quote-unquote expanded COVID subsidies will cost. $35 billion a year. That's like Texas's entire state budget is $88 billion a year, schools included. Maybe I'm off on that number. But this is a stunning amount. It's $1/3 trillion. So again, what happened? Let's back up. So Obamacare was bankrupt. It was a failure. Everybody knew it. Everybody saw it. And Republicans and Democrats and the swamp in D.C. colluded. And they used COVID to jam a whole bunch of money we didn't have, your tax dollars, go and create debt, tax you, tax your children, tax your grandchildren, and quote-unquote enhance subsidies. And it's going to cost $35 billion a year to continue them. And hallelujah to the congressmen, the Republicans in D.C. who held strong, shut down the government over the blackmail by the Democrats, and didn't extend them. Said, oh, we'll look at other options. Now, 4 rhinos and a 5th congressman from Texas is saying, yeah, we got to extend it. What does this do? Obamacare totally distorts the market. There's 24 million people in Obamacare, and almost all are getting subsidy. Initially, it was supposed to be for like 3 or 4 million, and they paid nothing. So what's a subsidy? Again, you pay all this money in federal taxes. The federal government then cuts checks directly to the insurance companies so that they bill people less for Obamacare. Because what the Ronnie Jacksons, the Republican congressman from Texas, is like, oh yeah, we got to do this because otherwise people are going to pay more. Well, yeah, because you're totally distorting the market. It is the new Green Deal of solar and wind. Without all this government subsidies, the market doesn't work. It doesn't make sense. And what happens when a market doesn't make sense? You, the taxpayer, you and I have to totally fund it in perpetuity as it grows and grows. And the Democrats and some moderate Republicans try to jam more and more people into it. And it just grows. So what happened? Let's look, Obamacare passed in 2014. What has occurred since 2014? More than 1 out of 4 private health insurance companies are no longer in the marketplace. They're like, hey, why are we trying to compete with a government subsidized program? We're just not going to offer health care. And Obama, the Democrats, and frankly, most of the Republicans knew this is the way it was going to trend. We're going to move to a socialized government because everybody is going to be put out of business trying to compete with Obamacare. Why? Because you and I, the taxpayer, keep dumping billions and billions of dollars. And the Ronnie Jacksons of the world are like, yeah, they should continue doing that. So what happened in Texas under this quote-unquote extended COVID money? Texas Obamacare enrollment grew from about 1.3 million in 2021 to 3.9 in 2025. There was so much cash jammed into it, so much of our tax dollars jammed into subsidies that it tripled in 4 years. Tripled. Look, if Obamacare only works with subsidies, and subsidies is almost a fraudulent word, it's our tax dollars. We ought not get sucked in to using subsidies. If it only works when you and I are being forced to give our tax money to it, then is it really working? And if it's not working, does that mean it's broken? And if it's broken, then why are Republicans voting to keep it alive? Why is Ronnie Jackson saying, oh yeah, we need to extend it? So what has happened through these extensions? What has happened since 2021, 2020 when we did this COVID farce, this new Green Deal for Obamacare, which is going to dwarf all the waste in Minnesota and dwarf the new Green Deal scams? Well, millions of people who had health care already in the private market, primarily through their employers, they moved into Obamacare. Why? Because our tax dollars that they're using the word subsidies for made it cheaper for them. So there was this massive growth. And now that we're clearly past COVID, and it was a scam to ever put this money in there anyway, people like Congressman Jackson and the 4 rhinos who are going to side with the Democrats to force a vote on this are saying, oh, the sky's going to fall. The premiums will go up unless we do this. Well, heck yeah, they will. Yes, they will, because you violated all sense of decency, stole our tax dollars, jammed them into this thing under this cloud of COVID when we couldn't see what was going on, just like they did with the new Green Deal. They grew a massive government entitlement, and now they're like, well, We can't take it. Heck yeah, you can. You and I are paying for it. And any of us who then also pay through our employers for private health care while we are subsidizing in the form of our tax dollars all of the Obamacare plans, we're basically chump. What they want is to move to one unified Obamacare, no private health insurance because they want government-run health care. That's all there is to it. It's nuts. So Texans are paying federal tax dollars to subsidize a system that only works when the Washington, D.C. swamp props it up with your tax money and borrows more money that our kids and grandkids are going to have to pay for. That's the national debt. And then the longest government shutdown in the history, October 1 through November 12, 43 days, air traffic controls, all these disruptions. And I got to say, I was so impressed with, it's just a small margin of Republicans, and they held strong in the U.S. House. And they said, nope. We're not going to have a hostage. We're not going to be forced into this. This is a bad deal for America and a bad deal for policy. And now it was for naught because 4 rhinos and folks like Ronnie Jackson are saying, oh, yeah, we got to go do it while we try to fix it. They've been trying to fix it from 2014. Their fixing it makes it so much worse. Why would we ever let these people continue? 43 days while the Democrats held America hostage, trying to force Republicans to fund Obamacare at these ridiculous COVID levels. Finally, Republicans stood for something and held together. I mean, I can't think of an example where they've done that of late. The Democrats demanded the subsidies be extended. They were willing to shut down and not pay all these federal workers and try to bankrupt the military and try to stop the airlines to force Obamacare extensions. And now 4 rhinos and Ronnie Jackson are like, oh yeah, let's do it anyway. How is this right for Texas? How is this right as a strategy? When does the Republican brand and word count for something? We got to ask some questions here in Texas. Why are Republican members of Congress willing to join with all these liberal Democrats to force a vote against the majority of Republicans on extending the very subsidies, your tax dollars that caused the shutdown? All 4 Republicans are moderate rhinos. They've already said we're going to go out and do this. And one of our own up there from Wichita Falls area, Ronnie Jackson, is like, yeah, we ought to do that. Otherwise, people are going to pay more. Why shut the government down, folks? If they're just going to fund the program anyway, if they're just going to scam us anyway, why go through the hassle? What is that country song? You got to stand for something or you fall for anything. So here we have one of our own, Congressman Jackson, publicly supporting the extending the subsidies, said, hey, otherwise we're going to face higher costs. Yeah, 100% we are, because it's a scam. Frankly, my take is let America see what it really costs. I hope it's $5,000 a month. So everybody goes, this is insane. Well, yeah, that's what happens when we only subsidize a little bit. And subsidize meaning take your tax dollars from Texas and put them into Minnesota Obamacare people. But if we keep going at a lot, you won't have to pay $5,000. You only pay $2,000 because the other $3,000 will be picked up by the rest of Americans' tax dollars. This is not a sustainable program, particularly when 1/4 of the marketplace of private insurers have already left. And now more and more, everyone's like, well, let's just go to Obamacare. It's cheaper. It's being subsidized. Well, of course it is. Because people like you and I, who do the right thing, who pay our taxes, are getting screwed. If they want to use, Congressman wants to use your tax dollars and my tax dollars to fund Obamacare, which is at least as corrupt and at least as riddled with fraud as the Minnesota abuses, I gotta ask why. Well, people are afraid that the rates will increase. Well, heck yeah, they will. So what happened? In Texas, Obamacare enrollment under this COVID extension went from 1.3 million to 3.9. That's not because we tripled the amount of poor people. That's because they were incentivized to leave other plans. A 300% increase because of COVID funding scam. We subsidize $2,500 on average per family. And the subsidy means you and I, the hardworking taxpayer of Texas, subsidize this for Texas families and all the other 49 states as well. We're a major economy, and we're picking up so much of the tab for the Minnesota fraudsters and the liberals in Illinois and the Californians. This is not the solution, Congressman Jackson. Republicans must stand for something or will fall for anything. If Obamacare only works with our continuing to subsidize it with our tax money, it is not working. It is broken. Why are Republicans voting to keep it alive? This is Anthony Holm, host of Politics with the Big Dogs. We were just talking about the fraud in Minnesota and how it equates to Obamacare here in Texas and beyond, and how a small handful of moderate Republicans are going to destroy what the House Republicans finally stood for in terms of trying to reform Obamacare. They didn't have the courage to end it. Oh, well, let's just reform it. Let's just make sure that the fraud is a little bit less. Let's expose some of the things like we have in Minnesota, and then we'll fund it at these ridiculous amounts. And funding it means taking your tax dollar and my tax dollars and giving it to people so they pay less, even though you and I are paying more. And I got to ask why Ronnie Jackson and potentially other Texans are willing to stand for that. It's shocking. Follow us on politicswiththebigdogs.com. Sign up for our newsletter. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Truth Social. We are out there. We're easy to be found. YouTube, politicswiththebigdogs.com. We're about to talk about the Islamification of Texas. You'll be shocked.
More with Anthony Holm coming up in just a minute. Don't forget to sign up for our newsletter at politicswiththebigdogs.com. While you're there, make sure you listen to our previous episodes of Politics with the Big Dogs. Politics with the Big Dogs is brought to you by the First Amendment Alliance Education Fund. Got a question for Anthony Holm? Email Anthony at politicswiththebigdogs.com. Now, more with Anthony Holm on Politics with the Big Dogs.
Mosques, Muslims, and Texas. Should we be concerned? Is there something to fear? Let's talk about facts. That's what we do on Politics with the Big Dogs. Deep dives. As I see it, the Muslim population in Texas 15 years ago was about 350,000. And it generally stayed around that level until about 2020. And then it went from around 350,000 or so to today's population, which is between 420,000 and 500,000. That's anywhere from a 20% increase to a 34% increase. The data is really hard to get and hard to find, but we're seeing a tremendous growth from my perspective. And this is based on the Texas Almanac and Pew and some of the estimates that we could pull from the census. But what does appear for sure is happening is that there are videos all over the internet. You can find them. They're in foreign languages, and they are Muslims in Texas recruiting other Muslims to move to Texas. You'll see them all over Twitter. You'll see them all over online if you search for them. And as they are translated, not by me, but by others, they say, effectively, move to Texas. You can live just like you're in your native land here in Texas. We are Muslim. We are opening mosques. We are opening communities. We have communities. Come here, live here, flourish in Texas. So here's what we know for a fact. We know that the 400-plus acre Islamic community being built in Plano, Texas. Remember old Jeff Leach, that moderate Republican, Plano, McKinney area, the guy who's out there protecting the non-English speaking, foreigners who are crashing into us in semis and heavy dump trucks and things, trying to change the law to ensure that we don't learn as a jury who speaks English and who doesn't. So go figure. There's a 400-plus acre Islamic community called EPIC, E-P-I-C. Attorney General Paxton is sued, at least investigating them, I think has sued. That EPIC stands for East Plano Islamic Center. It's a full development, 400-plus acre. Go figure that they'll target liberal Jeff Leach's area to create a Muslim community state, because Leach is someone defending those who can't speak or read English. He tried to change the law to further protect non-English speakers. They crash into you. You wear a turban, you can't speak the language, Leach is your guy. There's no way around it. So what is happening, and should we be alarmed? We have a long history as a nation. Our founding fathers, I'm really proud of this, religious liberty. So it's perfectly legal to build a mosque. And we, as Christians, support folks who want to explore faith. No way around it. And the U.S. Constitution and the founding fathers made it clear that it is perfectly legal to build a house of worship regardless of what house of worship that is. What I'm speaking about is something very different, and that is the Muslimification of Texas. It is hard to get good data. There are suggestions out there that in the last 2 years alone, no less than 48 mosques have been built in Texas. that is not fact-checked. It is very hard to get good data. At least I have struggled. If you're finding data out there, please send it to us, politicswiththebigdogs.com. But what I'm suggesting is a little bit different, right? We have now 2 Muslim state representatives, one from Euless area of Metroplex, Dallas-Fort Worth, and one from Fort Bend, a suburb of Houston. When they were sworn in the Texas legislature, their hands were on a Quran, whereas everyone else's was on the Bible. I don't know that that's an inappropriate event. That's their faith, but we all ought to be aware of it. It does give me pause when the complexion of our state is changing so radically, and it gives me pause if their values are not aligned with our values. We also have, I believe, the mayor of McKinney is an open Muslim, elected recently, also in Jeff Leach's area. So we have a real movement of Muslims recruiting Muslims into Texas, number one. Number two, Muslims being elected to state and local offices. Number three, EPIC, the East Plano Islamic Center development, is a Muslim community state, all encompassing. What kind of schools are they going to have in there? What kind of values are they going to have in this community? Will they all be wearing headscarves? None of us are alarmists, and we all follow our faith, and I believe each of the listeners, supports strongly our religious liberty in America and honors the founding fathers for doing so. I mean, that's how we got here. I also fervently believe that we as Texans and we as Americans share a set of values. And those values are primarily Judeo-Christian values. We see it in our money, in our flags. We see it all over. We've had these debates, in God we trust, and should we have the 10 Commandments in school? And there's a liberal left who really want to reject our Judeo-Christian values, which we've had for 250 years in this community. It's what we were founded on. That's why we take an oath under God, among many other things. And how do these Muslim communities intersect with our values? To the extent, from my perspective at least, to the extent that they align with our values, welcome. Learn our languages, understand our values, and if you advance them, I'm very supportive of you being here. But if you're going to contest the values of America, the complexion of our faith and our belief system, our open market, our liberty-loving foundation of truth that has made this the greatest democracy known in the history of mankind, then I'm having real issues with what's happening. So relative to EPIC, I don't know. But I want to step back, and I want us to talk about the bigger issue going on. This is happening with legal immigrants, happening with illegal immigrants. It's happening with the Somali community in Minnesota. It's happening the same in Michigan, where their values are being imported and seeding a community instead of people coming to America for our values and integrating into our community, right? The Irish did it. The Chinese did it. There was a wave of Germans. We've got a lot of people fully integrated. Yet more and more the last 40, 50, 60 years, we're getting pockets of people who don't learn the language, who don't share our values, who want to tear down America and our values, and often from within, be it the liberal activist left, where the government-run public school system is indoctrinating them, or the Ivy League schools are indoctrinating our children. We send them our children in outrageous sums of money, and they send us back these brainwashed radical activists. And now I got to ask if we're importing people to live in a community, to isolate in a community of 400-plus acres, or any other community, and attend the mosque to do the same thing. If there are Arabic recruiting videos and Farsi recruiting videos saying move to Texas, specifically move to the Dallas-Fort Worth, it's just like your home in Pakistan. You get prayer 5 times a day. You have your values. That gives me great pause for the community we're going to live in the near term. It gives me greater pause for the state and the nation our children are inheriting from us. What is happening here? And should we be concerned? We got Richardson, Texas, a small little city by Plano with a Muslim mayor. We got Euless, Texas with a Muslim mayor. We've got 2 state representatives, one from the Metroplex, one from outside of Houston. We've got the Jeff Leaches of the world trying to protect folks, change the law to protect folks who don't read or write English. We have a community of 400 acres that is a Muslim community, presumably with schools and with community centers. I want to understand what the dress code's going to be, whether it's written or implied. I want to understand what the teachings are going to be. whether those are written or applied. In Texas, we, some years ago, passed a law to ban Sharia law in Texas and to ban Sharia indoctrination in the school system. But we also passed a law to stop fraud, and there's plenty of fraud. We have passed laws to stop a lot of these things, yet it doesn't happen. So this gives me great pause, and I flag it for all of you. We have to watch for this, and we have to pay attention. It's just noteworthy that we now have 2 Muslim state reps, and it's noteworthy that we have 2 mayors. And it's noteworthy that we have a 400-acre Muslim community. Does that mean they're not going to allow Christians to live there? How does that work? All of us have seen, rather, the attack by Muslims in our nation on our values. We have all seen a majority of a city council in Michigan wearing hijabs. We have all seen this transition in the mindset, or the attempted transition of the mindset of America and the mindset of Texans. At what point do we have to say, stop, time out, it's time to investigate? Well, Attorney General Paxton has said that now. He is actively investigating Epic. But what else is out there? How many other Epics are there? How many mosques are being built? Who is paying attention to this effort? And should we pay attention to it? Is it a threat? Does it need reviewed? Perhaps not. But I'm open to the debate. I'm very curious about it. So look, religious liberty is protected, not just for Judeo-Christians, all religions. And it should be. You know, that's a foundational faith of how we launched our nation and why we launched our nation, to ensure that everybody gets to honor their God. But honoring one's God cannot conflict with the laws and the fundamental values of Americans, cannot conflict with the laws and the fundamental values of Texans. That is where the line stops. There's a famous quote, one's right to swing their fist, to spin around and let their arm swing freely, ends. That right ceases to exist at the tip of another man's nose, right? So that is a way to think about this. Frankly, you can swing your arm out in the air and have a grand time, but you can't swing it when you contact somebody in the face. And anyone who is building a mosque or advancing their faith has the right to advance their faith under our laws. That right ceases when it conflicts with our laws and our fundamental values. So who's paying attention? Who in Texas, outside Ken Paxton, is paying attention if and when those rights or those efforts conflict with our state laws, with our federal laws? Religious liberty is and shall be protected, always. Also, oversight and accuracy matter, because we know the media will not go and raise the flag on these issues. We know most elected officials won't raise the flag. They're afraid to be called Islamophobes or pick a name. Generally, cowardice. It falls on you and I to flag these issues. Look, if a Republican congressman is going to surrender to Obamacare, then how do they not surrender to the East Plano Islamic Center for fear? Only you and I have the courage to continue. And we must. You and I must pay attention. Religious liberty is protected. Oversight and transparency are also fundamental conservative values. That's how it is. This is Anthony Holm. You're listening to Politics with the Big Dogs. We've gone through the Obamacare debacle and how it's going to pop its head back up in the early months of the first quarter. We have gone through the Islamification of Texas, and in just a moment we're going to move on to the conflict between Donald Trump and Dan Patrick in particular over marijuana, THC, hemp, and the combination, and what that means for Texas and America as we proceed.
Love what you're hearing? Find all of our shows at politicswiththebigdogs.com. Subscribe to our newsletter and send in your questions. politicswiththebigdogs.com.
All right, folks, as we move into our next segment, marijuana, THC, and Texas law. I am not an expert in this space. I happen to be a lawyer. As you guys know, I'm a trial lawyer primarily with 18-wheeler and heavy vehicle crashes. But there's a lot of confusion out there. So I'm not an expert in this. I've done my best to give you good information, the facts, as I'm going to lay them out here. And remember, take a moment. Go to politicswiththebigdogs.com. Sign up for our newsletter. Sign our petitions. Let's outlaw some of these travesties. Let's outlaw taxpayer-funded lobbying, for example. Follow us on Facebook. Instagram, Truth Social, YouTube. We need your aid. We need your support. Forward our shows. Let's grow our audience. Let's affect change in Texas and beyond. Marijuana, THC, and Texas law. A lot of confusion, including some from me. Probably some outright misinformation. The federal government, Donald Trump, just made a big change. He changed it from a Schedule 3 to a Schedule 1. I do not pretend to be an expert in what that means. I'm going to state facts as I know them, and I'm going to state what I believe these mean. So the facts as I know them, absolutely, it does not legalize marijuana. Period. It changes it on the schedule the way the federal government looks at it. From a rather harmful drug to a much less harmful drug, a Schedule 1. It does not legalize marijuana or THC in the state of Texas. These are still a state-by-state issue, and Texas is one of the last, or frankly, one of the fewer states who hasn't legalized it, hasn't made a material medical exception, hasn't made material use exception for adults or otherwise. You'll remember in the legislative session, Governor Dan Patrick said things to the effect that the hemp loophole is turned into a de facto marijuana state in Texas. So hemp, the plant, the originating plant, as I understand it, from marijuana THC, and hemp is legal. There are hemp farmers. They use it for rope and clothing and otherwise. And then there is some amount of hemp product that is similar in effect to THC. THC, as I understand it, is the part of the marijuana drug that modifies people's behavior. So hemp and something called CBD, Charlie Bravo Delta, are legal in Texas. CBD will often find across America in wines and other. Hemp, I'm not sure if one can smoke it or not, but I believe what Dan Patrick was most concerned about are something called Delta 9, which is some really small amount of intoxicating hemp. And it isn't the THC levels of marijuana as we traditionally know it, but it does have some impairment effect. Delta 9, as my data indicates, it has to be below 0.3. It doesn't mean a lot to me. It may not mean a lot to you, but it is important to know that there is a nominal or a very small, as I understand it, medical marijuana exception for low THC doses for people, primarily children, but it may be may have gotten expanded to adults who are having mini seizures, often many a day. This apparently impairs that and improves their lives. You all and I will probably recall from the debates of a lot of the soldiers who came back from the war saying, hey, I really need this product. It helps me. I have PTSD. There's a lot of causes. So Trump and the federal government have decided this isn't as bad as many of the hard drugs. It's having less negative effects than many of the hard drugs. And the arguments that I hear generally are, oh, well, it's a gateway drug to the hard drugs. Maybe. I mean, maybe alcohol is too. I don't know. This is outside of my space. But what I think is interesting for you and I is now we have a situation where President Trump and Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, who are generally aligned on most issues and I think are close personally, they're diametrically opposed to each other, or at least opposed to where Dan Patrick was in April and May when he was trying to pass a bill to outlaw even hemp and Delta 9 in Texas, as I understand it, as I read those bills. The same thing happened. Poor old Leach. He tried to change Texas law to protect all the foreign truck drivers who can't read or speak English. And then right as his bill was getting some legs and it was a big battle in the Texas legislature, Trump came out and said, hey, this is a safety issue. Every state, you got to go and enforce the law. If a truck driver can't read or speak English, they can't get a license. So Trump really undercut Leach. Go figure. And I got to ask, is that happening in this instance? Now, unlike Leach, Dan Patrick is really closely aligned with Trump, and I don't at all think this is a personal back and forth, but it is a policy event that is going to carry for us and our community and our state into the next legislative session. Here's the laws in Texas as I understand them. Hemp and CBD are legal, and Delta 9, so long as it's this 0.3%, very small, and then there's some medical marijuana derivatives. I think it's like a fluid that doesn't make one high in the traditional sense, but I'm open to being wrong there. I think this is the situation that are legal for folks who have really severe epileptic seizures. Maybe it's been expanded beyond children and to some other ailments as well. but that's what I recall it being. What is illegal in Texas is recreational marijuana. And there is a difference, I think, between marijuana and hemp. What is also illegal is high THC. So THC is the thing that makes one high. And in this instance, it's high levels of THC. Currently, there's very low levels permitted of like 0.3. And what is also illegal are retail dispensaries, like just selling marijuana and marijuana product. Now, you and I see lots of these Delta 9 things as we drive around. They're out in the community. So I understand Dan Patrick's point, in at least to the extent that it's almost as if it appears that we have retail outlets. Yet it's kind of like, I don't know, a liquor store that only sells non-alcoholic beverages, I guess would be the closest analogy I can think of. I believe that's what's happening in Texas currently. But what is striking to me is this disconnect between Trump and Dan Patrick, or Texas, on the issue as represented by Dan Patrick, right? So that's interesting. And what does that mean for our policy debate going forward? If you get to stand up and say, hey, even Trump supports this, usually a policy will collapse among the Republican Party. So Texas does not legalize marijuana. The change from Schedule 3 to Schedule 1 did not legalize marijuana nationally. The states retain full authority, and Texas allows these hemp and CBD products and low-level THC medical use, as I understand it. We still have recreational marijuana illegal, and high THC is illegal, and retail dispensaries are illegal, but we did speak to what appears to be something similar. And then I have noticed that wines and similar, not even alcoholic beverages, almost like lemonades and teas, are being sold in Texas that have CBD in them. So I do wonder where that falls and what this means for Texas going forward. And will we go and outlaw something, or kind of is it like the Ronnie Jackson growing Obamacare situation? Well, now the people have had it for a few years and you can't take it away from them. I don't know. But this will be an interesting debate going forward, and it was a significant event that occurred under Trump. A lot of presidents have talked about doing this, and debates been open in America for like 25 years. Marijuana use is pretty prevalent, and certainly the soldiers and others make a compelling case, at least from my perspective, on unique carve-outs. But now a Republican president changed it from a Schedule 3 to a Schedule 1. And how does that impact us here in Texas going forward? You're listening to Politics with the Big Dogs. This is Anthony Holm, your host. Recently, I went through a number of the Republican primary efforts on the statewide ballot. We spent a lot of time on that, kind of dissecting. I've had a lot of questions about it, and a couple listeners wrote in or called in and said, hey, you left out at least two other races. And it's true. I did. So there is a contested primary for railroad commissioner. Jim Wright, the incumbent railroad commissioner. There's 3 railroad commissioners. They have 6-year terms. And even though their title is railroad commissioner, it's a really bit disingenuous because they regulate the oil and gas industry. We did speak about one of them in a recent episode, Christy Craddock. She's a statewide elected Republican railroad commissioner, and she's running for comptroller. So these folks who regulate the oil and gas industry, of course, can raise an awful lot of money, and they have a lot of impact over our oil and gas community. So it's a big, big job. Jim Wright is a fella. I've never met him. Flag that because many of these folks I have met and or worked with over the years, Christy Craddock and others. I don't know Jim Wright. If I met him, it's only in passing. And he's being challenged by a guy named Beau French. Many of you will recall Beau French had been the Republican Party chairman of Tarrant County for the last few, if not several years, as I recall. I don't remember exactly how long, but for some period of time. He has been a strong conservative, outspoken activist. I'm not saying Jim Wright isn't. Many of us who are involved in the conservative movement are familiar with the name Beau French because he's taken some pretty big, loud stances. And he's been real active in the opposition of the Chinese Communist Party coming into Texas. He's been real aggressive in opposing the Green New Deal and some of these big liberal efforts. I believe Jim Wright has been as well. As I understand it, Jim Wright got elected in 2020 and has opposed many of the new Green Deals and the DEI efforts from the Biden administration to jam it in the Texas oil and gas industry. So I don't know a lot about Jim Wright. I've met Beau French over the years, but I've mostly watched him. What I am flagging for you are at least two other statewide Republican primary contests and a little bit about the people. Now, these are some of the smaller races, but nonetheless, a number of viewers hit me one way or another or sent me a note on Facebook or on X and said, hey, what about these? And it's true. The Tarrant County, one of the largest Republican counties in Texas, which holds Fort Worth and other cities, the Tarrant County chairman has resigned to run and filed for Texas Railroad Commissioner. His name is Beau French. He's an activist, and that'll be an interesting race. It's down ballot. I don't know that either Jim Wright nor Beau French have terribly high name ID, but kind of like the Ken Paxton of way back when. You know, the state rep who didn't have a lot of name ID but was well known in the conservative movement for being so active in the pro-life movement and being a guy who was willing to challenge kamikaze race against real moderate and liberal speaker Joe Strauss. Beau French is kind of that profile of guy, so I think his name ID among activists statewide might be a little bit higher than we would expect from a traditional county party chair, even one as large as Tarrant County. So, folks, we've talked about a lot of heavy stuff today. And remember, on Politics with the Big Dogs, this isn't a Washington, D.C. cocktail party where we're going to keep things nice. We're going to get into truth. We're going to stand up to power, and we're going to expose what is really happening in the Texas legislature, in our lives, in our community, in the states of Texas, in the state of Texas, our communities in the state of Texas, rather, and at the federal level. So what did we talk about? We talked about the tremendous growth in the Islamification of Texas. We talked about a 400-plus acre development, a closed community state for Muslims, the East Plano Islamic Community, 400-plus acres. We don't know if they're going to have schools. We don't know what the dress codes are going to be. We don't know what the rules and the values that they intend to live under are. We know that Attorney General Paxton is investigating them. We know that Governor Greg Abbott has raised concerns about what may or may not be happening in that community. We know that we have previously outlawed Sharia law in Texas and Sharia teachings in our schools. But we also know that we've outlawed lots of things that are not being enforced in Texas. We know that we have at least 2 state reps who have been elected who are Muslims who were sworn in with their hand on a Quran. We know that we have a couple mayors up in the Metroplex, one in Richardson right by, or is it Richardson or McKinney? I don't remember. It's one of the little towns right by Plano, Texas, where this development is being built. We know that the Plano and McKinney-based Republican state rep has been advocating for folks who don't speak English and trying to change the law to protect them so that juries can't learn when they crash into you if they're driving these big semis or driving all these dump trucks and everything that we see folks in turbans and non-English speakers driving. He wants to change the law and say, right now, juries automatically learn that if you can't read or write English. Jeff Leach said, no, going to change that law. And then President Trump came out and said, hey, states, you have to enforce my rules that say you got to read and write English if you're going to drive these heavy trucks. And it really helped collapse Jeff Leach's effort. But nonetheless, he filed the bill. We know that we have lots of Republicans who are not acting the way you and I expect in advancing their values. They're surrendering to the herd. They're surrendering, taking the easy way out, not just Jeff Leach. We spoke a bit about Ronnie Jackson, a U.S. House member, who said, yeah, we ought to keep increasing this Obamacare tax subsidies, where I'm taking federal taxes from all the other Texans and distributing it to other states to ensure that everybody gets to continue to remain in Obamacare and grow it. You know, we talked about how that eviscerates the Republican success in shutting down the government. And not that the Republicans wanted to shut down the government. Indeed, the Democrats forced it. They said, hey, you got to continue funding Obamacare at these massive, these grossly inflated levels that we did during COVID. We used the COVID scam to juice all this money in. And in Texas, we tripled the number of Obamacare subscribers, not because poor people were finally getting access to medical care, but because people who had medical care, it was cheaper to go on the taxpayer subsidized program. And we tripled it in 4 years. And the Democrats said, no, you got to keep that same funding level or we're going to shut down the government. And they did shut down the government. And the Republicans in the U.S. House, who have a very slim majority, 5 or 6 seats at the most, they held together for 40-plus days. And finally, the Democrats cracked. Democrats had no problem stopping the paychecks of the military, stopping the paychecks of the federal government, sending people home, sending aircraft controllers home, and impairing the skies and impairing commerce in America to try to force this onto us. We, being conservatives and Republicans, and I'll very rarely will I praise Republicans in D.C., but boy, they held together on this one. They got through it. They didn't surrender. They said, no, we'll give you a vote on something else, and we'll work with you. But if we got to get out all this corruption, there's so much fraud in Obamacare and corruption, it's going to blow Minnesota away. We know that. It's clearly the way it's growing. And then recently, after all that work and all this shutdown and all this consternation, the media attacks, 4 moderate Republicans, not from Texas, said, hey, we're going to side with the Democrats and we're going to force a vote on Obamacare funding, on taking your money, on your tax dollars and continuing to fund it. And one of Texas's own, Ronnie Jackson, from that North Texas area, Wichita Falls, not too far from his district comes down, not that far from the Plano Muslim community development of 400 acres, says, yeah, we ought to do that because otherwise Texans are going to pay more. You're going to see this shocking herd mentality of people who just don't stand their ground, Republicans who won't stand their ground, who said one thing to get your vote and now are up in D.C. or down in Austin, if they're a state representative or a state senator, and they're doing something else. We're going to see Obamacare expansion continue in the first quarter of 26. Mark my words, that is my prediction. I'm saddened, but we're going to see it. We went in depth about that. We went in depth about the growth of Hamas and the Islamification of Texas. And are we getting Sharia law? Is this 400-acre community, this Muslim Islamic center, going to have schools? Are they going to let Christians in? Are they going to let Christians live there? What does it mean? We discussed that Attorney General Paxton is investigating it in some way, shape, or form, and Abbott's out there speaking against it. And we talked about the natural conflict that presented itself, which between President Donald Trump and Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick. Rarely do we say that. These two are almost always aligned and seem to be close personal friends. But on the Schedule 3 to Schedule 1 use of marijuana and THC, they are in dispute and in conflict. So what does that mean for Texas with the upcoming legislative session, which is January of 2027? We all remember well that Dan Patrick was a fall-on-the-sword type guy over trying an effort to ban any hemp or CBD or anything related to THC in Texas. And he said, hey, Texas has become, loose and fast, basically. I think that's suspect as a statement, but it was some version thereof of, we've become effectively a marijuana distributor. That bill died, that effort died, ultimately vetoed by Governor Abbott and watered down by others. Whether it was an accurate statement or not an accurate statement, the law remains in Texas that CBD and hemp and this Delta 9 stuff is available for sale. I think Dan Patrick has a strong point, however, with the number of retail outlets. It is striking to me. And then recently, Donald Trump said, you know what? We're going to change marijuana and THC. It's no longer a Schedule 3 drug, which is highly regulated and more concerning. In the eyes of the government, it's a Schedule 1. It's a much less concerning drug. Now, that doesn't change anything in the state of Texas. just like the life issue, we regulate marijuana consumption here, and Texas has not embraced marijuana consumption like most of the other states have. Perfectly fine, have no issues with that. I'm just clarifying the law. But it being the act of Donald Trump changing it from a Schedule 3 to a Schedule 1, create a conflict. I believe a political conflict and potentially a policy conflict between Dan Patrick, the strong advocate for eviscerating all hemp and CBD production and consumption in Texas, and Donald Trump. And those type of conflicts are tough among Republicans because, frankly, whoever's on the opposite side of Trump usually loses. The example that I gave from this session was the Jeff Leach effort, right, to protect all the drivers who can't read or write English from the jury learning that. And then Trump came out in the middle and said, hey, too many people wearing turbans who can't read or write English are killing folks as they drive their semis into them on America's highways. Guess what, states? You have to enforce this law. You must enforce it. Reading and writing English is a safety function for these guys driving 50 and 60 and 70,000 pound vehicles. You got to force this. And that really collapsed Jeff Leach's effort to change the law and to protect these people. And then the last thing that we touched on was a number of people reached out from a prior segment and said, hey, you didn't talk about the Railroad Commission primary and who's in it. You're right. It is a down-ballot race. Number one, Railroad Commission, remember, is, even though it's called railroads, they don't regulate railroads. They're oil and gas industry. There's 3 of them. It's a 6-year term. Jim Wright, someone I don't know, who hasn't made a lot of buzz, at least that I have seen over the last 5 years, is running for re-election. And a guy named Beau French, who had been the chairman of the Republican Party of Tarrant County, which is Fort Worth, a big county party, and a vocal activist. Obviously, there's 254 counties. Each has a Republican Party chair. But a handful of these people make more news, and Bo Jackson is one of those handful. He spoke loudly against the Chinese invasion of America. He spoke loudly against the New Green Deal. My understanding is Jim Wright has aggressively fought the New Green Deal coming in and harming Texas oil and gas regulators and producers. But again, I don't know a lot about Jim Wright, and I didn't spend a lot of time on that race. But the listeners are correct that I did not go through it at a previous show, so we're hitting it now. So, folks, this is a summary of what we have hit. We do deep dives. This is not niceties. We are politics with the big dogs, and we look at things with integrity, candor, and honor. So please sign up for our newsletter. Go to politicswithbigdogs.com. Join our petitions. Let's ban taxpayer funding lobbying. Let's ban some of these other atrocities happening in Texas. Let's all keep our eyes and ears open on the Islamification of Texas. And if we find a way to monitor the growth and the building of mosques, I think that would serve us all well. It does look to me like we're having a tremendous explosion in mosques coming to Texas, and clearly Muslims are recruiting other Muslims in their native tongue saying, move to Texas, you can live here like you do in your homeland. We ought to be thinking about that. We believe in religious freedom, we believe in religious liberty, but the values of America and honoring our laws and our organization and our structures as a community is essential to being American. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you for the hard work you do on behalf of the conservative movement in Texas and beyond. God bless you, and God bless Texas.
Politics with the Big Dogs with Anthony Holm is supported in part by the First Amendment Alliance Education Fund. Learn more about today's guest and hear other episodes online in our archive. Visit politicswiththebigdogs.com. If you have a question for Anthony Holm, email Anthony at politicswiththebigdogs.com. From deep in the heart of Texas, you've been listening to Politics with the Big Dogs.